Good morning, and I'm glad you're all able to come. Let me introduce myself. You might be wondering what this strange-looking gentleman is doing here. My name is Luis Francia. I'm a writer, poet, and journalist. I live in New York, and the festival was so kind as to invite me here to participate in the different activities, and they also asked me if I'd be willing to engage in conversation with BenCab, and I said, of course. You know, we've known each other, well, I won't tell you how long we've known each other, but we've known each other quite a while, going back to, you know, Los Indios Bravos days, those of you who may be old enough to remember. But anyway, yeah, it gives me great pleasure to be able to have a talk with BenCab, as he's popularly known. And we'd like to keep this as informal as possible and have, towards the end, a few minutes for anyone in the audience who might have questions or comments. But I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of another national artist from the Philippines for literature who is with us, and that is Virgilio Almario. So, Mr. Almario, would you care to stand? So we'll begin with a short visual presentation of BenCab's work, as well as his museum, which is in Asin, which is not far from Baguio City. Pogi. you. That was a wonderful presentation. And I have to say that looking at this presentation, it struck me that the BenCab Museum is probably unique in the world in the sense that it's set on an organic farm. It faces a hillside that's heavily forested, and it has a waterfalls on the property and a river that goes all the way down to the South China Sea. So it's more than just a museum. It's also a manifestation of a way of life, and maybe that's where we can begin. Ben, if you could tell us what made you think of having a museum where it is now and what you envision it for.
Yeah, when the place in Asin was offered to me, it started with a 2,000 square meter lot, and the owner kept coming to me and said, "Why don't you buy this and this?" Because most of them are already in the States. So in 4 years, eventually I was able to get the almost 2 hectares of the hulugan, you know, I was paying it by installment, yeah. And it occurred to me that I have so much. I'm a magpie. I collect a lot of things, and I concentrated mostly on the Cordillera collection because I've been living in Baguio for 24 years, and tribal art in the Philippines is very underrated, and I think it's a very good way of showing and sharing my collection. Aside from the tribal art, I have the contemporary art of the Philippines. So thought of having a museum.
How did the community, when you first started to build the museum, what was the reaction of the community, the barangays around? Because I know that's right, it's in Asin, which is a traditional wood carving village. So how did the communities react?
Yeah, they welcomed me, and they didn't realize that we have such rich culture in terms of the Cordillera.
Okay.
They themselves are not aware that the early artifacts are really very, very good. And also, they think in terms of more tourists will come around that area because they're selling also their carvings.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so it was good also for the local economy.
For the local economy.
I remember we had a conversation once where you had told me that a number of collections that are now in the museum, including yours, you were able to buy because these were in danger of being gotten rid of. Could you tell us why there was that danger of certain families getting rid of, you know, valuable artifacts?
Well, most people who really appreciate our tribal art of the Cordillera are foreigners, French, Americans.
Yeah.
So they get all this treasure and bring it out of the country. So I thought of, you know, if I can save a few more and keep it in the country.
When did you start collecting, say, the bulols?
The bulols, yeah, in at least 40 years ago, slowly, when they were still cheap. But as I earn also in my work, in my paintings, I was able to acquire a few more. So and they also realized that I'm putting up a museum. Most of the people who sells this send it first to me before they bring it to other.
So you become a resource that they can turn to before they feel they need to sell it to somebody who might bring it out of the country.
Right.
Okay. So the collection you have, so you're collecting bulols even before you moved to Baguio?
Oh yes, yeah.
This was...
even when I went to London, I was bringing them with me.
Oh, really?
And some I brought it back again.
Okay. And so could you maybe, as a backstory to how you wound up in Baguio, you were living in London. Why, when you chose to come back, why Baguio?
Well, after London, I miss actually I like the rain and the cold, cool weather. So
London.
I really decided to move to Baguio. And also Baguio has, since I moved there, I have a lot of friends. Remember, we started the Baguio Arts Guild, and we were very active in coming out with an art festival.
Yeah, I remember the very first Baguio Arts Guild Festival was held, was that the year of the earthquake in 91
Yes, yeah.
or 1990?
Also, yeah.
So, could you tell us, you know, what the Arts Guild was about and a bit of its history?
Well, I came back in '86, and that time also, well, that was during the EDSA revolution, and a lot of artists came back, like Santi Bose and the Baradas, and and we started forming this guild, and that started, a very good group dynamics that really became quite large. And as you know, you were invited to do your poetry and things like that. Right. When I was the chairman, it was a 10-day festival, and artists from Asia came. We got everything from theater to dance to performances.
Yeah, I remember one festival. I participated in an installation with two artist friends, one of whom is now living in San Francisco, Alan De Souza. I believe he teaches here, and Young Soon Min, and we collaborated, and we did it at the cultural center
It's
near
in
UP.
It's the center, yeah,
Yes.
where it was built by Imelda, the one that when they had the chess tournament.
Right, for the Bobby Fischer.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So we were using that place, the whole building, for the festival.
It was a great festival because it brought in artists from Australia, New York, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, and it was a lot of fun. And certainly, I would hope that the festival here continues, because it is a great opportunity to bring people like BenCab, artists and writers from different parts to, after all, as the saying goes, we are one planet, one future. Going back to your early years in Baguio, what was that transition period like? You were used to living in London, which is a very urban Western capital, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in Baguio, which is rainy weather. I guess it reminded you of London, but also it didn't have the infrastructure of London. Was that one reason you wanted to move up there, was to kind of have, be able to focus more on your art without the distractions that come with modern urban living?
That's right, yeah. And that also, it's cheaper to live in Baguio then. Because otherwise, I won't have this museum,
Okay.
Because if you live in Manila, you'll be in a condominium or something.
Right.
And I was lucky that I was able to buy my cousin's house
on Cabbage Street.
In Cabbage Street,
yeah.
And that started it.
Yeah, I remember visiting Ben when he first moved there, and the street is named Cabbage Street, which I thought was great. I could already see how Ben had landscape, because he had the studio and the house, and in between was a garden. And actually, I wanted to ask you about that. You've always seemed to have had this feeling and touch for gardens.
Yeah, having lived in London, it's gardening there is an obsession. Okay. And I learned a lot from them, and
you think they'd have better food, right?
Yeah. I always loved to plant and to garden. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good way of meditating. I also have bonsai.
Yeah,
And
bonsai. Yeah.
So it's a way of relaxing.
So the BenCab Museum, you designed it also to raise crops. I mean, vegetables.
Yes, yeah.
Could you tell us what you raise on the farm?
Anything that grows, actually. I don't have any.
Anything?
I don't have any plants.
Okay.
In summer we have corn and lettuce and herbs. Yeah.
Coffee, right?
Coffee. We tried our coffee and also have a few animals.
Huh. Okay. Does being in this kind of environment, does that have an influence on your art?
In a way, yeah. There's towards my later years, there's more meditative work than yeah.
I also
lots
noticed...
of angst in the Philippines, in Manila.
Okay. I also noticed, and I'm sure this is pretty clear to people who study your work, this focus on ostensible Philippine themes like native dress, the Cordilleran features, moods, temperaments. What made you get into this focus on, what would be considered, indigenous ways of living? What was it in your own background that made you go that way?
It's really more of an influence. I admire the Ifugao culture where everyone can build a house, they can do carvings, they're farmers. In a way that they're complete, And the place is really nice. Well, as you see, the museum.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing place, and I repeat, that anyone who goes to Baguio, you have to see the museum because it isn't just a museum; it is a way of life, and so you cannot miss. You should not miss the museum if you're ever up there. And I think we talked about this earlier. Last year or 2 years ago, there was a dance performance
Right, yeah.
on one of the central characters that surfaced in your painting many years ago. Somebody based on a real-life person, Sabel.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us about who Sabel was and why she figured so prominently in some of your
Well,
works?
Sabel is a bag lady, and when I was living with my parents, I used to see her.
Where was this?
In Santa Cruz area, Barbang. And I did a lot of sketches and photography. And that early years I was doing portraits of scavengers and Sabel and all that. And she became sort of an icon, and I guess...
Did she know you were...
She doesn't know me,
Okay.
but she used to come to the house to ask for food and things like that. And what's her name? Agnes Locsin one day said, "Can I do a whole dance based on this character?" It's really just a symbol of a woman, that's dispossessed and all that. And she created a whole dance based on that. Mostly on womanhood. Yeah.
Which was premiered at the Ayala Museum.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And was there another national artist who was involved in that work? Was it Bien Lumbera?
Bien did a short poem.
To accompany
To
the...
accompany, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a collaboration by the music by Joey Ayala and things like that. So we even brought it to Singapore when I had a show there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
And was it also performed at the museum?
at the museum.
Okay.
Yeah.
And once, did you ever find out what happened to Sabel, the real person?
Well, I understand she died a long time ago.
Okay, and she never knew that you were...
No.
Okay.
She never knew.
Yeah.
But she was a kind of transition period for my work. When, remember, I did also a whole series on the Filipinos abroad in 1978,
Right.
which included you.
Right.
And after a whole series of paintings, when the rest period really is when I work on Sabel until I get a new series of paintings.
Okay. Many of your paintings also deal with historical themes like the Philippine-American War, the revolutionaries.
Yeah.
Could you tell us something about, your interest in that?
Well, the interest is when I started collecting Filipiniana books and maps and prints when I was in London.
Okay.
And I thought of doing a whole series of turn of the century. At first, I was doing it as a parallel to the present time, like I did The Servant Girl, and then when I did the Filipinos Abroad, became Domestic Helper, and now it's called OFW.
Yeah. And you did
that kind of parallelism.
And you did a work based on Flor Contemplacion,
I did that also.
and that was shown in Singapore.
In Singapore, yeah.
What
She was this Filipina who was hanged in Singapore.
By the Singaporean authorities. She had been accused and found guilty of murdering a child, I think, and though there was evidence later on that showed that maybe that wasn't the case. But what was the reaction in Singapore when you...
Well, I didn't put her name, but it's her portrait. But when they realized that it was Flor, I was already out of the country. And then somebody called me from Singapore and asking me, why did you exhibit that and this and that?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And
I just said it's a symbol of the Filipina working hard in another country, and and because of pressure, sometimes they get crazy.
So when you were in London, did you also meet Filipinos living in London who were working as domestics?
Oh yeah. The early years, there a few of them, and we started putting up a newspaper called Balita London, and it started by Carmen Pedrosa.
Pedrosa, right.
But she left us handling the newspaper, so my ex-wife started doing the editing, and I have to do photography, layout, and we have to go to some remote places where the Filipinos are working. They're really very, very lonely in places like old people's home and like that.
Right. Yeah, I remember that because at the same time in New York, we started a magazine as well, which was anti-martial law. And I think when you came over in the late 70s, it was still clearly the Marcos regime was still in the Philippines. But I wanted to maybe go back to your work and your presence in Baguio, Asin, and maybe talk about this school that you've been involved with that's not far from the museum.
Right.
Could you tell us something about that?
Well, I was approached by the teachers from that school, and they said they're desperately in need of a classroom because they don't have enough classrooms. Most of the students there are children of the Ifugao carvers.
Right.
And the school was donated by another Igorot who owns the land. So we went to check the place and decided to build a classroom.
Okay.
But not just building a classroom, but painting a mural outside. So they welcome it very much, yeah.
And you're still involved with the school?
Yes. I mean, we were able to get from some friends who will donate pencils and things like that.
School supplies.
School supplies, which is most welcome there.
That's great. Maybe finally, before we open it up to questions from the audience, could you tell us what you're working on now?
Well, tomorrow I'm going to Mexico. I was invited as an artist in resident. I'm supposed to stay a month, but I said I can only stay 2 weeks because I'm really busy in the working on the museum. So maybe, I don't know, after that, the whole series of work.
Based on...
I still don't know what I'm going to do.
Okay. Yeah. Well, good luck on your trip to Mexico City. I think you love it. It's a great city. Now, we'd welcome comments and questions from you. We'd like to hear from you. If you have anything you'd like to ask of Ben.
My name is Sir Sinyeba. I'm from Sacramento. And I have a cousin who lives in Baguio. And she told me the pine trees are being denuded. And I think most of your materials are from that kind of wood. Now, what kind of wood do you use?
No, the carvers in Asin, which is the carving village, have been using a lot of pine trees and all kinds of wood that they can hold on. But when I got my area, in my area, the forest, I noticed most of the trees been cut because they use it for carving. And so I started planting back pine trees and they're growing quite well.
Thank you.
Also, a substitute for wood is bamboo. And they're going to, there's a campaign to encourage the carvers to use bamboo. And we're going to have a contest for carvers to do bamboo carvings. And we in the turn of the century, Filipinos used to do beautiful carvings on bamboos. And the winners will be exhibited in the museum afterwards. So it could be a start.
BenCab, much has been said about you. You're an intriguing figure. This is a simple but curious question. In your paintings, do you try to say something about the Filipino? Who is the Filipino? Or are they basically paintings of Filipino in certain historical situations?
Yeah, there's always the elusive Filipino. Who is a Filipino? And as an artist, you go through that period. You try to, to portray the Filipino. I guess I've done a few of those, and I think any Filipino artist that paints is a Philippine art. Don't know.
I think it's a question that comes up in literature as well. A Filipino writer writing about something not obviously Filipino, is that Philippine literature? And as a writer and a creative artist, I feel that a painter, a poet, a sculptor, filmmaker should be able to choose the subject matter he or she is interested in. It doesn't mean he or she is less Filipino or less Chinese or less whatever. So I don't know if that helps address your question.
No, it's just the perspective. It's the perspective that is often unique to the individual artist. And sometimes it can be expressed, it can be said. Sometimes it cannot be satisfactorily expressed. But that's what I find rather intriguing.
Okay, is there somebody else before I go back to this gentleman? Yes, ma'am.
This is a question to both of you. What is the role of the Filipino, Filipino writer or Filipino sculptor then, in our society now? That is a follow-up to our question. I know what you said, that you have the freedom, to choose your topic, but then how would you summarize the role of the artist?
The role of the artist is to create.
Are you a catalyst for change, or is that not even in your mind?
Well, I certainly don't write and say I'm going to change the world, and I don't think any artist self-respecting does that, because then it becomes propaganda. However, if what I write affects some change for the good, or maybe for the worse, I have no control, then that's beyond my control. And, so it depends also what, say, I write as a writer. As a poet, it's very different from what I write as a journalist. I have an online column for the Inquirer, for instance. And there I write as a involved citizen, whose interests in that particular blog are very different but related to my interests as a poet. So I don't think in terms of a role. I write what moves me, and maybe that's the best way of answering that particular question. Ben?
Yeah, it's the same with me. It's your time, and you portray your time. During the 80s, there's a strong social commentaries of they call social realism of the Filipino painters, and they're very political. But now, after after martial law, I mean, a lot of Filipino painters now paint without that angst of being, being oppressed Filipino and things like that.
There has always been an interesting debate between, whether an artist should actively be a proponent of social change or not. And I think the world of art is big enough to accommodate those two visions, and any and all visions. I mean, it shouldn't be just one way. If an artist or a writer wants to engage in work that pushes a certain social vision, that's great. But it first has to succeed as art. A lot of political poetry, for instance, is terrible. The politics are great, but the poetry is bad. And to me, the best political poetry is one that doesn't seek to be obviously political, but you still get a sense of the injustice or the social infirmities that the poet is dealing with. And I would imagine it's the same thing in painting and in art.
We have a question from our chief curator. What was your nickname again?
Gubat.
Mr. Gubat.
BenCab, the work of yours that's on view upstairs on the third floor, etching from 1975 called 1081. I know that 1081 is the number of the bill or
Declaration
the law.
of Martial Law.
It was the proclamation of martial law. Could you tell us something more about the circumstances that brought forth that work and the moment that it came out on?
Well, it's again a reaction. When right after martial law, I started, using images that will portray the violence that it brought through and the campaign against martial law. It really just portrayed, well, Marcos is there as well, the one with the X. Yeah. And that was exhibited in Chicago Library when I had a show there. and the Consul General took it away. Yeah, and some of the anti martial law were there. Claro, somebody
Yeah, okay.
wrote a story about that the long arm of martial law painting censored. So it made something.
Here's the donor of the work to the Asian Art Museum.
Ah, great. Yeah, thank you. Now I'm represented.
I think we have time for
One more.
two more
One more.
questions, because I know Bailon
Okay.
wanted to ask one. So first.
We are very honored to have the national artist here. We are very honored to have BenCab.
Thank you.
I am very honored that I'm wearing this cap because this cap painted last Friday with BenCab. And it will
Mabuhay.
always be with me. My question is, what advice could you give us new painters in expressing ourselves? You know, I have seen all your work. What advice would you give us who are trying to become a painter?
Keep on painting.
Perspire.
Just push on. I mean, yeah. It's a lot of discipline. I mean, you know, you have to have a routine and work on your paintings. Yeah. Any medium. I mean, any medium that suits your personality. If you like drawing or acrylic painting or oil on canvas. Yeah. Well, exposure also. Visit more museums and learn from that.
Next question.
So Bailon has given up her question to you.
Okay.
And I hope this doesn't put you in a spot, but recently there has been a brouhaha on the exhibit of what they call sacrilegious art at the CCP.
Yes.
So what's your comment on that, please?
Well, I didn't see the show. I was away at that time. But it's if you do something that will affect religious group or something like that, I think the cultural center should have put a large sign, that an advisory that if you go to this exhibition, it could affect you, you know. So I think that was what's missing. Not ban it, no. It's a freedom of expression of the artist.